The 2006 volleyball incident. On July 2nd, 2017, an anonymous user posted a thread on 4chan's paranormal board saying, "How does one live after taking the red pill on the 2006 volleyball incident?" Now, if you're wondering what that incident was, it's a strange and disturbing story. The post was referring to a supposed mass shooting where a gunman killed 14 people during a high school volleyball game in either South Dakota or Nebraska back in 2006. But here's where things get strange. If you search for any information about it online, you'll find nothing. No news articles, no official casualty reports, nothing. Just conspiracy theory websites and the occasional Reddit post asking if it even happened. It's like the whole event either never existed or was somehow erased from history. But despite the silence online, there are many people who claim they remember hearing about it. Some even say they were at Mount Rushmore around that time and heard a report about it on the radio. For a long time, the only evidence of the incident on the internet was this still frame from a home video that was supposedly taken just before the incident with the date September 27, 2006 embedded on it. That is, until some ordinary gamer, a YouTuber who often dives into dark web rabbit holes, discovered more evidence. While browsing the Late Nights forum on a 4chan-like site, he came across the gruesome pictures of a bloody school gym that were allegedly taken soon after the shooting had already happened.
So right here, let's go down a little bit over here. They've got 2006 volley. Oh my god. Oh, we're gonna have to blur this one. Jesus Christ, that's actually like death footage. I think I remember this. I was searching around for some sort of proof of this happening, and apparently it's a snippet from a home video. Oh my god. We have to blur that out. I gotta make sure we note that, blur it real quick. Let me add that to the notes here. Jesus, it's like an actual straight up bloody massacre. It's like VHS recorded. This has to be from like a movie. There's no way. This has to be from like some movie. It's crazy as hell. That it's got like a CBI not for release. Like I assume CBI stands for like some sort of a governmental organization or something. That is so messed up. I feel like I should have known this or something. I don't even know if that's like a conspiracy. How is that a conspiracy? It's actually like death foot, unless it's from like some movie or something that we don't know about. Jesus Christ. That is actually the most chilling thing I've seen. We're like 5 minutes into this recording and already it's just like death footage has hit the building.
In the bottom right corner was the text CBI not for release, which I'll do my best to show you while blurring everything else out. This has led to some pretty wild theories being spread all over the internet. According to the most popular ones, the incident did happen, but it was covered up by the American government. As the story goes, the government was trying to assassinate someone who was attending this high school volleyball game. Things got out of hand, however, and a lot of the young volleyball players were caught in the crossfire. And since this would have caused tons of backlash from the public, the government instructed the news media to not talk about the story and also paid the victims' families to keep them quiet. However, while the US government is no stranger to covering up the truth, I have to admit this one is quite far-fetched. Keeping something this big under wraps for so long feels pretty out there. At some point, you'd think the truth would slip out. A somewhat more reasonable theory is that this is a classic case of the Mandela effect, where large groups of people collectively misremember something. And coincidentally enough, I actually did find a similar incident that happened in 2006 in that region. In the Platte Canyon High School situation, 53-year-old Dwayne Roger Morrison took 7 female students hostage, attacked them, and ended up shooting one of them. This also took place on September 27, 2006, which is the same date on which the alleged photo was taken before the incident. Its location in Colorado might also explain why people from the Midwest remember hearing about it on the news. But there are some major differences. Most notably, the Platte Canyon incident had nothing to do with a volleyball game, and there was only one death. But in saying all of that, the most likely scenario is that all of this is a hoax. While researching this incident, I came across an interesting post on the forum Above Top Secret from 2017. In this post, the OP was talking about creating a hoax in which multiple school shootings happened in 2006 in tiny towns, but any information relating to these incidents has been mysteriously erased from the public record. But if that's the case, the images that some ordinary gamer came across, where did they come from? Considering it's been over 7 years since this first contraction on the internet, it's unlikely we'll ever know the answer to this disturbing internet rabbit hole. Grave robbing for morons. On August 8, 2014, a user by the name Simon Pred J posted a video on YouTube titled Grave Robbing for Morons. This was a digital re-upload of a very old VHS video, an extremely chilling one at that. In it, a young man goes into disturbing detail explaining step by step how to rob graves and sell the remains on the black market.
Grab it by the eyes or the nose. You pull out, put your finger all the way in. There's nothing there that will hurt you at all. Or you have to make sure of that. There's nothing that can hurt you. Do not be afraid. Pull it out like that. Do not pull it by the teeth, or else it'll break out like that, and you will have holes.
What makes this video even more unsettling isn't just its content, but the mystery surrounding it. No one knows who the man in the video is. To this day, his identity remains unknown, and no one has come forward to claim responsibility. This has left the internet in two fiercely opposing camps. Some believe this is authentic footage of a real grave robber. Others argue it's an obscure horror short crafted purely for shock value. Surprisingly, I came across evidence that supports both sides of the argument while researching this topic. One undeniable fact, however, is that the original video is extremely old. The earliest mention of its title, Grave Robbing for Morons, I found on the internet was a now defunct online store for horror VHS tapes called Shocking Videos. This website listed the tape for sale in April of 2003, stating, "What we have here is genuine camcorder footage of a drunken teenage stutterer giving a half-hour lecture on how to steal body parts from graveyards for fun and profit while holding a fresh, rotting skull in his hands." That said, the original video is likely from the late 80s. We can clearly see the VHS box for the 1987 Evil Dead 2 movie 5 minutes and 43 seconds into the video. And to narrow it down even more, there's an issue of Horror FX magazine visible in the bottom left corner at the same time. This specific cover was a part of a unique Fangoria horror magazine edition released in July 1989, which means the video was probably shot around that year. The horror memorabilia scattered throughout the footage implies that whoever created this video might have been a die-hard horror fan just trying to make something creepy for the thrill of it. And while most of the gruesome advice given in the video feels very authentic, like describing ways to remove the skull from a body that hasn't fully decomposed yet, there are also sections that seem extremely goofy. Like when the host suggests knocking out witnesses so they think it was all just a dream.
Never leave witnesses. If you have to knock them out so that way they think it's a dream.
This gives further credence to the theory that the subject doesn't have any real grave robbing experience and is just making it all up for the video. On the other hand, some people argue that the skull he's showing in the video is far too detailed to be fake. As for the inconsistency in the advice, that could be explained by the theory that this was likely his first time robbing a grave, and that he was simply making things up to seem more knowledgeable on the topic than he actually was. But this is where things start getting really eerie. Toward the end of the tape, the guy almost mumbles his full name, but stops himself before saying his entire last name.
Okay, this was made by Anthony. Well, as a matter of fact, let's forget the last name.
And in 1999, a man named Anthony Casamassima was arrested in New York for stealing an expensive stained glass window from a cemetery. There was a real possibility that this was the same person who made the Grave Robbing for Morons guide. That being said, there are a few inconsistencies that say otherwise. For instance, I did not find any charges against Anthony Casamassima that mentioned him desecrating bodies. He was more into stealing valuable artifacts like stained glass. And more importantly, Casamassima was 40 when he was arrested in 1999. If he made the tape, he would have been around 30 at the time. However, given the young appearance of the video's subject, that seems highly unlikely. I also found a couple more theories as well, but most of them lead to dead ends. One such theory claims the guy in the video might be Craig A. Bradley, who was arrested in 1995 for stealing human remains from a cemetery in upstate New York. Craig would have been around 24 when the grave robbing video was filmed, which fits with the young appearance of the guy in the tape, plus he even looks a bit like him. However, the issue with this theory is that Craig doesn't have the stutter that was prominent in the original video.
Usually, winter months I'm laid off. So winter months, I don't usually pay.
Dig for you and everything, so you dig and your friend digs, and then it's another friend digs. You have to find someplace really secluded, so that way there's no interruptions, okay? So
Now, he could have faked the stutter in the original video for some reason, however, people on the internet find that extremely unlikely given how real it feels. Grave robber or actor, the stutter is real. I've known several people with really bad stutters, and it's such a specific, uncontrollable behavior that makes it hard to fake. This kid's stutter feels unique and authentic. I've never seen an actor in a movie fake a stutter that felt this real. It's possible one day the person seen in the video will come forward with the truth, but for now we have no idea who the person is or whether or not this extremely realistic looking grave robbing video is real. Strange sounds in the sky. Over the past 50 plus years, there have been numerous reports of people hearing mysterious sounds coming from the sky. In some cases, the mysterious noise resembles the sound of screeching metal, like someone dragging heavy metal furniture across the floor. However, the most commonly reported noise is a low-frequency hum that persists in the area. Those who can hear these sounds describe them as omnipresent and extremely annoying. And according to the BBC, the humming noise has been linked to at least one person ending their own life in the UK. However, while there are likely many legit reports of people hearing a mysterious humming, which we'll get to in a bit, many of the claims are either fake or can be explained quite easily. For instance, the metallic screeching noise could simply be from a nearby railroad with a long freight train rounding a corner and causing vibrations. Some of these trains are incredibly lengthy and can take several minutes to pass. Similarly, in another video you can hear what sounds like an extremely loud trumpet. The original poster of this video titled this as a judgment trumpet, referring to the divine trumpet described in the Christian faith. However, given the poor weather conditions in the footage, it's likely just a malfunctioning tornado siren, like this. A few of these videos are also outright faked, with the mysterious sounds being edited in to generate views. Notice how the birds around the area appear completely unaffected by the loud, ominous noise, which would be unlikely if the sound was genuinely overwhelming the environment. Birds have sharper hearing than humans, and they would likely react. That said, there are still thousands of reports from people who can't be easily debunked or labeled as fake. Unlike the examples I've shown so far, the vast majority of seemingly authentic reports involve the persistent, low-frequency hum. This strange phenomenon seems to trace back to Bristol, England in the late 1970s. The city council received hundreds of complaints from residents about a strange noise that was audible at night. One local newspaper even asked readers in the city, "Have you heard the hum?" and almost 800 people said they had. French scientists back then proposed that the sound might originate from the ocean, suggesting that continuous waves could be vibrating the ocean floor. Now, this explanation might have been true for Bristol, but as time went on, more and more people around the world started reporting these disturbing humming noises. And it appears the Bristol hum is still present to this day. There are many theories that attempt to explain the bizarre global phenomenon. And these can get into some truly out there conspiracies, like aliens or secret underground civilizations in the hollow earth. However, the most plausible explanation I found suggests that these sounds are more connected to the listeners themselves rather than their surroundings. Things like hypersensitive ears and early signs of hearing issues like tinnitus could be a major contributor. Another possible reason could be the increasing levels of anxiety and stress. A BBC researcher also noted that she only heard the hum when she was exhausted and stressed out, which further supports the notion of this mysterious hum being a psychosomatic or stress-related phenomenon. During my research, I even found the video claiming to capture the strange humming sound. But when I watched it, there was nothing unusual, just regular environmental noise. It's entirely possible that the person who recorded it was hearing something from inside their body, misinterpreting it as an external sound, which further supports the stress-related theory. However, this doesn't explain the hundreds or even thousands of other videos that do include the hum. And given the endless amounts of possibilities for each individual case, I doubt we'll get a concrete answer anytime soon. John Lang Fresno Police. On March 20th, 2015, a YouTube channel by the name Lang Marine uploaded a 3.5-minute video titled Fresno LE Harassment, Ford Crew Cab that stalked me at my residence numerous times. The video showed the same vehicle driving past the camera twice in 3 minutes. The uploader was a 51-year-old former Marine named John Lang living in Fresno, California. The video footage came from a security camera he had installed outside his home. And in the description of this video, he provided much-needed context behind the oddly disturbing encounter. According to Lang, he was critical of the way Fresno PD and Fresno Fire utilized their budgets online. So now they were stalking and harassing him in retaliation, and the Ford truck in the video belonged to either the Fresno Police Department or the Sheriff's Office. The next day, he posted another video of a man walking his dog outside his home. The video showed the dog and his owner stopping outside Lang's home for a few seconds and moving on, nothing too unusual. However, Lang claimed that the person in the video was a plainclothes police officer who was conditioning Lang's dog so that it wouldn't attack if the same officer broke into his home later. Over the next 10 or so months, Lang continued posting videos of shady activity captured by his security camera, like a guy in plain clothes coming up to his home, taking a look and walking away immediately. Or a police truck stopping outside his home for a few seconds and then driving away. However, the most disturbing of these videos showed a mysterious black van stopping outside his home, filming it with a massive camera for about 30 seconds and quickly driving away. Lang claimed that the device in their hand was a thermal imaging sensor and they were trying to determine whether or not he was home. By January of 2016, Lang was fully convinced that the Fresno police were planning an assassination. On the 16th of January, he posted a video about a cleaning company van parked outside his home. In the description of the video, he wrote, "If I turn up missing or dead tomorrow, remember this van. I think I seen a couple of guys sneak out the side door and into the building when it was parked in the carport this afternoon. I've been causing the city of Fresno a lot of problems recently, which I now regret." Unfortunately, this would be the last video Lang would post on YouTube, because just a few days later, firemen found him dead inside a burning home with multiple stab wounds on his body. This was sad news for people who were following the story. However, this was only the beginning of a much bigger conspiracy. You see, when the news of his death initially broke, the reports stated that he had a few stab wounds on his upper back as well. If this were true, it would validate all of Lang's worries about getting assassinated. This would also put the Fresno PD as the #1 suspect for his murder. However, when the Fresno coroner released Lang's autopsy report, it only mentioned 3 self-inflicted stab wounds on his chest, and there was no mention of any stab wounds on his back. Was the earlier report a mistake, or were the Fresno police trying to hide their crime? This inconsistency led to tons of backlash and even a petition to reopen his case, but it remained closed. To this day, the John Lang case sits as a mystery. Was he actually getting stalked, or was he just severely mentally ill and paranoid? From my research, the answer seems to be a mix of both. First and foremost, it's worth mentioning that the Fresno police are well known for being ripe with corruption. A Reddit user mentioned a story he knew about the PD, stating, "I mean, my friend's dad was FPD for decades, and Jerry Dyer showed up with some officers and threatened him back in the late 90s, so it wouldn't surprise me if the cops were intimidating this dude." So, did the Fresno PD retaliate against Lang? Maybe. What's more likely is that Lang was getting more paranoid and losing his mind over time. From what I can see, the man walking his dog is doing just that, walking his dog, and claiming that he was somehow conditioning Lang's dog in just a couple of seconds is pretty out there. Even the suspicious van can be explained quite easily since the device shown in the video was just a film camera on a gimbal, not some high-tech thermal imaging sensor. As for why they were shooting like that from a vehicle, they were likely indie filmmakers who just didn't have the proper permissions from the city. However, all of this is just conjecture on my part. The real evidence that proves Lang's deteriorating mental state is the fact that he turned off the cameras he had in his home a day before the incident. The last saved footage on these cameras was of him sitting with a kitchen knife in his hand. Not only that, but when the fire department arrived on the scene, all the entrances to his home were barricaded securely from the inside. If this was truly a murder, the killer wouldn't have been able to escape the crime scene without removing one of these barricades. Ultimately, if there was some big murder conspiracy behind Lang's death, I doubt we'll learn about it over 8 years later. Evil Stick. In November of 2014, Nicole Allen purchased a pink princess wand for her 2-year-old daughter at the dollar store in Linden Avenue in Kettering. The name of the wand was Evil Stick, which is quite bizarre on its own, but likely went unnoticed by Nicole. However, the stick also promised things like luster, beauty, and wonderful music. The box art also featured the character Sakura Kinomoto, who was the protagonist of a popular Japanese animated show called Cardcaptor Sakura. In the show, Sakura is essentially a magical princess, so the inclusion of just a cute-looking character made Nicole drop her guard even further. But she couldn't have been more wrong. The thing is, the inclusion of this character on the box art suggested an Asian origin for the product. And looking back, the Evil Stick does have a small, and I do mean small, resemblance to one of the wands Sakura uses in the show. The Evil Stick was most definitely a bootleg version of a product that should have looked something like this had it been official. However, the Evil Stick was much more sinister than just being a bad product. Unlike its official counterparts, the manufacturers of the Evil Stick bootleg had free reign to do whatever they wanted. And it's what they chose to do with this freedom that was utterly disturbing. You see, the top of the wand had a shiny foil fitted in, likely to imitate the shiny star in the official wand. However, this foil was hiding an image under it, and when Nicole's daughter accidentally removed the foil while playing with the wand, she was greeted with a downright disturbing image of a creepy-looking woman slitting her own wrist. This was likely petrifying for the little girl, but that wasn't all. If you pressed the button on the wand, instead of the wonderful music it promised, the wand played a haunting laugh. This also turned on a light behind the creepy image, so the little girl would have likely seen it even if she hadn't removed the foil. When Nicole found out about the disturbing truth, she made her findings public in hopes of getting this creepy toy banned from stores. News coverage of the Evil Stick quickly went viral, but the toy remained as mysterious as it was creepy. And the disturbing image concealed within the toy was traced back to French photographer Butcher Ludwig, who appears to be a master of creating the most nightmarish artworks one can imagine. Nearly all of his work is too graphic for YouTube. For most of them, however, even a quick glance is enough to trigger your fight or flight response. As for why the gory, horror-filled work of his photograph was stolen to be included in a children's toy, no one knows for sure. The only other thing people learned about the Evil Stick after examining its package was that it was manufactured in China, and that's it. The packaging didn't have the name of the manufacturer. I even looked up the universal product code embedded in its barcode and couldn't find any relevant information through that either. This is just one of those things that really makes you wonder what other disturbing mysteries are hidden inside cheap children's toys. Spontaneous human combustion. At around 8 a.m. on July 2, 1951, a woman named Pansy Carpenter received a telegram. It was addressed to one of her tenants, a 67-year-old woman named Mary Hardy Reeser. She went to Reeser's apartment to deliver the telegram, but despite calling out to her multiple times, Pansy didn't receive any response. She tried to open the door, but the doorknob to Reeser's apartment was uncomfortably hot to the touch. Unsure of what to do next, Pansy called the police. After arriving on the scene, officers opened the door by force. However, what they saw behind that door would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Reeser was gone. In her place was a pile of ashes scattered across the floor. Upon closer inspection, officers found part of her left foot still wearing a slipper along with fragments of her backbone. Even more bizarrely, later reports mentioned that her skull had shrunk to the size of a teacup. What made the discovery even stranger was the condition of the apartment. The fire that had consumed Reeser's body was confined to a shockingly small area. The surrounding furniture remained untouched. In his report, St. Petersburg Police Chief J.R. Reichert stated, "We request any information or theories that could explain how a human body could be so destroyed and the fire confined to such a small area and so little damage done to the structure of the building and the furniture in the room not even scorched or damaged by smoke." Reeser's death became one of the most infamous cases of what is now referred to as spontaneous human combustion. This phenomenon describes cases where people seemingly ignite and burn to ashes without any external fuel source, leaving behind only a few remains like a leg or a hand. A similar thing happened to physician John Irving Bentley in 1966, where the only thing left of him was the lower part of his right leg and the rest was burned to ashes. Later in 1979, another case made headlines. A 51-year-old woman named Beatrice Oski suffered from the same fate on Thanksgiving in a village in Bolingbrook, Illinois. And as absurd as the concept of humans unexplainably catching fire sounds, it's definitely not a hoax or legend. One of the earliest documented cases of spontaneous human combustion was recorded in 1746 when Paul Rowley wrote about the mysterious death of Countess Cornelia Zangari Bondi. Since then, dozens of similar incidents have been reported across the world. One of the recent examples of this phenomenon was in Sequoia County, Oklahoma in 2013.
The cause of this house fire is still undetermined, where they found a man dead inside his home, but the sheriff says he isn't ruling out spontaneous human combustion as one of those causes. Investigators say they found a man dead from a fire lying on the kitchen floor, but the sheriff says there were only reports of smoke coming from the house. Fire investigators who have years of experience say they've never heard or seen anything like this before.
I really would like to see the coroner's report on this one after it goes to the state crime lab.
So, what's going on? How could a human body that's around 60% water go up in flames? Of course, some theories lean into the bizarre, claiming phenomenon like poltergeist activity, lightning strikes, or even unexplained cosmic forces. There's even speculation about a mysterious subatomic particle called a pyrotron that allegedly ignites human bodies. But these ideas are for the most part easily dismissible. The people making these claims don't have any real evidence to back them up. That said, we can get some idea of what's going on after taking a closer look at all of the reported cases. And after sifting through most of them, I noticed some similarities between the victims. Notably, many of them were elderly and on the heavier side when it came to weight, had an unhealthy drinking or smoking problem, and a potential source of fire was nearby, like a burning stove or fireplace. Researchers have noticed these similarities as well and have proposed the wick effect theory. To understand this theory, think of how a candle works. When we light the wick on fire, it uses the wax surrounding it as fuel to burn for an extremely long time. So, according to the wick effect theory, something like this must have happened. The fire likely started from an external source like a lit cigarette or a spark from the fireplace igniting the victim's clothes. The person was either passed out from drinking or was too weak to immediately put the fire out. Or before the clothes could burn off, the fat stored in their bodies started acting like the wax in a candle, making them burn until there was nothing left. This would also explain the bizarre burning pattern where the torso is completely incinerated and the legs are left behind, since we carry most of our fat content in our abdominal region and very little in our legs. Unfortunately, experiments performed to prove this theory haven't been very successful. For instance, back in 2016, BBC decided to recreate the conditions of the wick effect with a pig carcass. And while its body was completely roasted, it didn't disintegrate into ash like the many cases of human combustion. That's simply because the fire fueled by fat tissue doesn't have the temperature required for what's essentially cremation. Back in 2012, biologist Brian J. Ford tried to explain the high temperature requirements in his 2012 paper titled Solving the Mystery of Spontaneous Human Combustion. According to Brian, factors like alcoholism or low-carb dieting produce acetone in our bodies, which is the same chemical found in paint thinner. Now, acetone is extremely flammable and can easily reach temperatures that would turn a person into nothing but ash. Brian also created small puppets out of pig meat, coated them with acetone, and lit them on fire. The puppets burned for about 30 minutes and left only the legs intact, just like with the human cases. But if Brian's theory is correct, it still doesn't explain why spontaneous human combustion is so rare. If all it takes is alcohol and a specific diet, why aren't we seeing more cases of this phenomenon? Especially now that there are cameras everywhere. Unfortunately, we have no answer for that. It might turn out to be something completely different from what we believe right now. But this phenomenon of humans burning to ash without damaging their surroundings is real. And it's just a matter of time before someone uncovers the truth behind this disturbing rabbit hole. The OKC bombing unidentified leg. In 1995, Oklahoma became the site of one of the deadliest acts of terrorism in American history. Amid the chaos and destruction, rescue workers made a strange and unsettling discovery: a single, unidentified leg buried in the rubble. What should have been just another piece of forensic evidence quickly spiraled into a chilling mystery, one that continues to raise questions long after investigators thought the case was closed. But to fully grasp how this one unidentified leg ties into the bigger plot, we first need to understand what happened that day. On the morning of April 19, 1995, at 8:57 a.m., a mysterious Ryder truck pulled up in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City. However, the people working in the Murrah Building didn't pay much attention to it. Work was about to start and everyone was rushing to clock in on time. Unfortunately, this day would end in disaster just minutes later. At 9:02 a.m., the Ryder truck exploded with the force of 5,000 pounds of TNT. Within moments, the surrounding area looked like a war zone. A third of the building had been reduced to rubble, with many floors completely flattened. Dozens of cars were incinerated on the spot, and more than 300 nearby buildings were damaged or destroyed. The momentary damage was estimated to be over $650 million, but the human toll was far worse. The explosion claimed the lives of 168 people, including 19 children. Around 700 people were also injured in the initial detonation and the resulting collapse of the building. It wasn't long before the FBI was on the scene and looking for clues to find the suspect, which didn't take long. On April 20, investigators found the rear axle of the Ryder truck. That single piece of evidence carried a vehicle identification number, leading them to a body shop in Junction City, Kansas. With the help of the employees of the shop, investigators were able to create this sketch of the person who rented the Ryder truck that was used in the attack. The next step was to circulate it around town. By April 21, the break they needed arrived. A local hotel employee recognized the sketch and even remembered the man's name, Timothy James McVeigh, a 27-year-old ex-Army soldier. However, when investigators began looking for Timothy, they made a shocking discovery. He was already in jail. As it turns out, he had been arrested just 90 minutes after the bombing, roughly 80 miles north of Oklahoma City. Oklahoma State Trooper Charlie Hanger pulled him over for driving without a license plate. The state trooper also found a concealed weapon on Timothy, which led to his arrest. A thorough search of his getaway vehicle also revealed a business card with an incriminating statement written on the back, reading, "TNT at $5 a stick, need more." As investigators looked deeper, they learned about Timothy's motive behind causing such a tragedy. His actions boiled down to extreme radicalization and anti-government rhetoric. Much of his anger stemmed from the 1993 Waco siege in Texas, a 51-day standoff between federal agents and the Branch Davidians, a religious cult. The siege ended in a catastrophic fire that killed 86 people, including women and children. Timothy was particularly angered by the government's use of tear gas on women and children. He had been exposed to the gas as part of his military training and was familiar with its painful effects. However, despite catching their suspect and learning about his motive, the investigators wanted to weed out any potentially hidden accomplices like foreign terrorist organizations. They reviewed multiple pieces of information and found out that Timothy used barrels and ammunition nitrate fertilizer as the primary source for the explosion. They also discovered and arrested his two accomplices who helped him throughout the process, Michael Fortier and Terry Nichols. With their arrests, investigators believed the case had finally been cracked wide open. However, during the rescue efforts, the police encountered a new problem. Amid the rubble, they discovered an unidentified left leg. By this point, most of the victims had been accounted for and buried. The existence of this leg didn't make sense. Who did it belong to? Things became even more disturbing when the owner of the leg was identified as one of the victims, Lakeisha Levy, a member of the U.S. Air Force. However, when they exhumed her to place the leg where it belonged, the investigators were shocked to see that Lakeisha was already buried with two legs, a left and a right. Further investigation revealed that the unidentified leg did indeed belong to Lakeisha, and she had been mistakenly buried with one wrong leg. But this raised an even bigger question: who was the owner of the leg Lakeisha was buried with? It has been nearly 30 years since the incident, and we still don't have an answer. A popular theory I came across was that the mysterious leg belonged to a second accomplice who came with Timothy and was mistakenly caught in the blast. This would be a viable theory if not for the fact that the investigators did not find any solid evidence pointing towards a second suspect being at the crime scene. But despite the lack of proof, the mystery has sparked some wild conspiracies. You see, there's a group of people who believe that the bombing was a government conspiracy to cleverly destroy investigative documentation regarding the Clintons and the Whitewater scandal. According to this theory, the mysterious leg belonged to the second accomplice who was working for the government. And the reason it hasn't been identified even after all these years is because it's part of a deliberate cover-up. But from what I've seen, this theory is a bit too far-fetched to be true. Think of it this way: if the people in power wanted to get rid of some documents, they had a million other, more suitable ways to accomplish this goal. Ones that didn't involve the tragic loss of so many lives. The more likely explanation for this mysterious leg is that it belonged to some undocumented homeless person who was near the building at the time of the incident. One Reddit user also backed this theory with a personal account stating, "I visited the area the day before with a coworker to get a search warrant from the U.S. District Court and also visit the people in the Murrah building. I was there during the investigation as an investigator. There was a black homeless woman that panhandled in front of the Murrah building. Everyone in my office was convinced it was her. We had seen her many, many times. You'll never change any of our minds that the leg wasn't hers. However, we really don't know if this is true to this day, and we likely won't ever, as I highly doubt the FBI or the Oklahoma government would reopen the 30-year-old case and spend tons of money just to confirm or deny the theories floating on the internet. Hybrid. In March of 2002, a tabletop RPG called The One Paragraph RPG was published by a person named Matthew/C++. It was already an extremely bizarre and overly complicated game with nonsensical rules and mathematical equations. However, the author changed its name to Hybrid and kept updating the game over the upcoming years. And with each update, the game got more and more complicated. As it stands right now, Hybrid has a total of 551 rules, which explain everything from the progression to the power system. But the truth is, these rules don't really explain anything. Hybrid is a chaotic mishmash of disjointed ideas and concepts that fail to work together, leaving the game completely unplayable. Of course, the large number of rules is a massive deterrent for most people, not to mention the horrendous, headache-inducing color scheme of the website. But even those who actually spent the time to read and decipher these rules have come to the conclusion that the vast majority of Hybrid is utter nonsense. For example, Matthew included countless mathematical equations in the rule set, but solving these equations often requires abbreviations like C2, DP, and LP, none of which are ever defined in the game. To make matters worse, some of the equations themselves are entirely made up and don't even adhere to basic mathematical principles. And as if that wasn't enough, the game is also riddled with odd tangents like movie reviews and a brownie recipe in case the players got hungry while reading the rules. Now, some people have tried to rationalize Matthew's intent behind creating these pages of utter chaos and nonsense, seeing this as a genuine attempt from someone with zero knowledge of game design. However, given the sheer oddity of this whole thing, that doesn't seem to be the case, which leaves us with only two options to justify the existence of Hybrid. For starters, it's entirely possible that this whole thing is a massive troll. The author knows that 99% of his quote game doesn't make any sense and made it just to confuse people on the internet. Now, this could have been a plausible theory if not for the fact that Matthew kept working on it for years. The website hosting the game was shut down in 2009, but the author came back with a blog in 2016 and has continued the game since. Not even the most dedicated trolls have the time and energy to churn out so much gibberish for so many years. From what I've seen, the more likely option is that Hybrid is the life's work of a madman. Matthew is serious about creating the most complicated tabletop RPG ever. However, he's also suffering from some sort of mental illness, likely schizophrenia, which would explain everything from the random tangents, nonsense rules, and bizarre rants. In fact, the Hybrid RPG poses a striking resemblance to poorly planned comics by someone named Jack Masters, which I discussed in a previous video. Jack was also suffering from severe schizophrenia and created something just as bizarre as Hybrid. Sadly, given how long it's been going for at this point, I really doubt the author of Hybrid would ever come out and explain his situation and intentions in plain text. Temple OS. Terrence Andrew Davis was born in 1969 in West Allis, Wisconsin. He had a keen interest in computers from a young age, which resulted in him learning the assembly programming language on a Commodore 64 as a teenager. He later earned both a bachelor's degree in computer engineering and a master's degree in electrical engineering from Arizona State University and began working for Ticketmaster as a programmer. He had a good education, a steady job, and loving parents. Things were looking up for Terry. Unfortunately, by the time he turned 27, he started experiencing regular manic episodes. He was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, the latter of which became the driving force behind the project that made him famous, Temple OS. You see, back in 2003, he experienced a self-described revelation. In his words, God spoke to him and asked him to create a temple, which would later take the shape as an operating system. This operating system went through many names, including J Operating System, Sparrow OS, and Lose Those. Terry finally settled on the name Temple OS in 2013 and published his work for the world to see. The most impressive thing about Temple OS is that Terry spent a decade building it from scratch. It featured 119,000 lines of code, and every single one of them is written by Terry himself without relying on any existing libraries of code. And for an OS created by a single person, it's chock full of features, including his own programming language called Holy See and multiple games based around religion. Like After Egypt, which requires the player to travel to a burning bush which generates randomized text. Terry believed that this text was coded messages from God. However, while his programming skills remained sharp, his ability to grasp the reality around him kept getting weaker by the day. He would often go on incomprehensible rants with an unhealthy dose of slurs.
God, I hate Frasier. The CIA glow in the dark. You can see them if you're driving. You just run them over. That's what you do. CIA.
He often posted similar rants on his Twitter account as well. However, among the madness, he would sometimes become lucid and say some extremely profound statements. What's reality? I don't know. When my bird was looking at my computer monitor, I thought, that bird has no idea what he's looking at. And yet, what does the bird do? Does he panic? No, he can't really panic. He just does the best he can. Is he able to live in a world where he's so ignorant? Well, he doesn't really have a choice. The bird is okay even though he doesn't understand the world. You're that bird looking at the monitor, and you're thinking to yourself, I can figure this out. Maybe you have some bird ideas. Maybe that's the best you can do. Unfortunately, his mental health took a devastating turn in December 2017. After refusing to take his medication, Terry got into a heated argument with his parents.
Well, I'm King Terry, and learned how to purify myself in a horribly impure environment. It's pretty rough living homeless and in a...
The confrontation pushed him to leave his home, and he spent the following months living on the streets, homeless and struggling. In September 2018, Terry's life came to a tragic end when he was involved in an accident with a train near an overpass in Portland. However, despite passing away over 6 years ago, Terry still has a dedicated fan base online that's willing to keep his memory alive for decades to come. Chris Burden. Christopher Lee Burden was an American artist who began his work in the early 1970s. However, unlike many artists whose goal is to create something visually pleasing, Chris's art was more about the idea of personal danger as artistic expression, and this was apparent from the get-go. His first known art performance was at the University of California in 1971, where for his final thesis, he locked himself in a locker for 5 days with nothing but a jug of water to drink and an empty jug to relieve himself. His next big art piece was a picture of him with a pistol aiming at an airplane. While he did get a visit from the FBI for this one, it was far from his most disturbing art pieces. Because in 1972, he performed what was later called TV hijack, which involved him going on an interview on TV and then holding the host of the interview at knife point. Fortunately, he explained to the terrified host that this was just an art piece and no one got hurt. But the most chilling thing about Chris's work was that he wasn't afraid of getting hurt. In his 1971 performance called Shoot, he gave his friend a rifle and told him to shoot him in the arm. Now, the idea was the friend would barely graze his arm. However, he missed the mark and ended up shooting Chris clean through his arm, forcing him to be rushed to the hospital. And while the pain in this performance was accidental, Chris has also done pieces where he gets hurt on purpose, like the 1974 performance called Transfixed. For this performance, Chris Burden crucified himself shirtless onto the back of a pale blue Volkswagen Beetle. With nails hammered through his palms, he remained in that position as the car was driven slowly around his neighborhood. In his later years, he moved on to more traditional sculpture-based art. However, his willingness to put his life on the line for what he considered art is still unmatched. As for the meanings behind his many deeply unsettling performances, experts have yet to reach a consensus. It's unclear if his stunts had some genuine meaning behind them or if many of them were just to say, look what I can do. But knowing Chris and his work, this is exactly how he'd want his work to be remembered. The Luna Park Fire. On June 9, 1979, at around 10 p.m., Sydney authorities received a call that would change the lives of many people forever. The ghost train ride at Luna Park was on fire, and dozens of people were stuck inside. The ghost train's signature feature was its dimly lit, winding tunnel where riders were surrounded by special effects, including an imitation fire. For many inside, the flames ahead looked like a part of the ride, a harmless illusion meant to thrill. But as they would soon learn, this fire wasn't part of the attraction. And by the time they realized the danger, it was too late. People tried to find a way out, but the tunnel was pitch black, and the thick smoke made it impossible to breathe or see. With the ride's mostly wood construction and with no sprinklers or fire safety in place, the flames just tore through everything. The ones that somehow managed to find the exit barely escaped with their lives. But their horrors didn't end there. 12-year-old survivor Jason Holman described the disturbing sight he witnessed while standing outside the ghost train. He was waiting for his friends to come out from the ride as well, but what he saw instead were empty carriages rolling out of the tunnel completely on fire. This sight was even more haunting for Jenny Godson, who had come to the park with her husband John and 2 sons Damien and Craig on a family holiday. The family had spent the day enjoying the park's many attractions and had 4 tickets left at the end. The boys, aged 2 and 4, decided to spend these leftover tickets on the ghost train. John went with them on the ride, while Jenny went off to get ice cream for the family. By the time she got back, the fire had already destroyed everything.
I was from the country. I came down here to share a night with my family, and my whole world just sort of fell to pieces.
Fire trucks rushed to the scene and spent hours trying to prevent it from spreading further. And while they managed to stop it before the whole park burned to the ground, it was already too late. In total, the fire had claimed the lives of 7 victims, 6 of which were children. The ride also featured several life-size figures dressed up as ghosts. And when rescuers found these 7 victims, their bodies were so badly burned that paramedics found it difficult to distinguish them from the burned mannequins. Given the unexpected nature of this fire, most people thought that it was arson. However, lead detective Doug Knight quickly shut down any speculation and claimed that it was nothing more than an unfortunate accident.
We're now satisfied that the fire was as a result of an electrical fault within the building.
Now, I have seen many paranormal theories that try to explain the fire. For instance, some believe that since the ride was themed after ghosts, it resulted in actual ghosts gathering there in its tunnels and causing a fire. One of the victims, Damien Godson, also took this picture with a cowman earlier in the day, sparking the speculation that this mysterious masked man was the one who caused the fire, when in reality he was likely nothing more than a mascot. The true cause of the Luna Park tragedy, however, is much scarier than any ghost or creepy cowman. It's human greed. You see, Detective Doug Knight ordered the demolition and cleaning of the site less than 12 hours after the fire was put out. Even if they had absolute proof that it was an accident, this was still highly unusual and extremely suspicious. However, the police stuck by their statement that the fire was caused by an electrical fault in the ride's building. 8 years later, in 1987, Australia's National Crime Authority reopened the investigation and discovered that the previous investigations were ineffective and inadequate. However, despite this revelation, the Luna Park case would remain a mystery for another 34 years. In 2021, journalist Caro Meldrum Hanna investigated the case and uncovered previously hidden evidence, including several key witness statements. According to Caro, the police went to great lengths to hide statements from people who mentioned smelling highly flammable kerosene before the fire broke out. Some people also reported seeing several shady men walking the park. A teen even mentioned overhearing one of these shady men talking about starting a fire. Not only were these reports never investigated by the police, but these witnesses were also pressured to follow the electrical fault narrative that the investigators were telling the public. And Doug Knight was supposedly in on it the whole time. He was allegedly working for crime boss Abe Saffron, who was also known as Mr. Sin. He wanted to own the prime waterfront real estate the park was sitting on. And what better way to drive down its value than by reducing it to ashes? As a result of Caro's findings, the Australian government has now reopened the Luna Park investigation. They've also placed $1 million reward for anyone with information that could help investigators reach the bottom of this case. Perhaps this will pave the way for a breakthrough, finally delivering justice to those 7 victims after half a century. On May 8, 2025, a Reddit user asked a grim yet straightforward question on r/askreddit, stating, "What is the most messed up thing you have ever done?" Initially, replies to this were filled with either obvious jokes or relatively tame confessions involving relationship drama. However, after about 30 minutes of the post being live, one user replied with a disturbing comment that stood out from the rest. It read, "I ran over a woman and her child in California in '96. I don't remember the specific city, but I'll never forget it was the intersection between Vanowen Street and Louis Avenue. I think the mom died, but I don't remember what happened to the kid. I got away scot-free, and I'm only telling this because the statute of limitations already passed." Now, it's not uncommon for people to just make up shocking stories on Reddit for attention. And at first this didn't look any different, until another user did some digging and discovered an LA Times article from July of 1996 about what seemed like the same incident mentioned in the comment. That article, along with others from the time, not only confirmed the OP's claims, but also revealed the horrifying details of what actually happened that day. According to the reports, the victims of this incident were a 19-year-old girl named Ruby Moreno and her 1-year-old daughter. Ruby had taken her daughter to a nearby hospital on the morning of July 29 to treat a few minor cuts she got while playing. She stopped at a relative's house on Vanawin Street on her way back and was about to return home at around 10 p.m. But as she was attempting to get into her car on the driver's side, she heard a loud screeching noise from behind. She looked back and saw a car barreling towards her at 100 miles per hour. According to other witnesses, this car had swerved to avoid hitting a van just seconds earlier, causing it to lose control. Seeing this, Ruby panicked and started running from the speeding car with her daughter still in her arms. Unfortunately, luck wasn't on her side that day. Before she could reach the sidewalk, she tripped into the street and was struck by the car moments later. The impact sent her flying over a parked car and onto the roof of another. The baby was also tossed several feet into the air before falling on the asphalt. Miraculously, the baby didn't receive any lethal injuries and was able to survive without any lasting damage to her body. Ruby, however, wasn't as fortunate. She was rushed to the hospital but succumbed to her injuries the same night. As for the driver that hit her, witnesses reported him trying to flee the scene, hitting another parked car and then a curb before successfully getting away. And from everything I could find, the perpetrator was never identified or arrested. So, if this Reddit user was telling the truth, there's a real chance he was the driver behind the brutal hit and run nearly 3 decades ago. The report from 1996 also mentioned that the driver was likely intoxicated due to the way he behaved after hitting Ruby. And when asked, the user admitted that this was the case. Were you drunk at the time, as the article says, or were they wrong about that? Inebriated, sure, more high than drunk. I was on a lot of junk back there. But the most disturbing part of his confession was just how cold and remorseless he seemed about the entire incident. Why no sympathy? Was this on purpose? No, but it's been so long. It's like a whisper of a memory. Do you think about how that child has to live without a mother now? Genuinely asking, you seem stone cold. It's been 30 years. That child probably has children of its own. I seem stone cold because I've already been through all the stages of emotions. I've justified myself, I rotted with guilt, I've had sleepless nights. I'm an old man now and I'm waiting to die any moment. I can't change what I did. I can't even pay for my crime anymore because California doesn't send people to prison only on a confession, and regardless, my health alone would render me incompetent to stand trial. There's nothing tying me back to that day but my word. Which brings us to the big question, was the OP actually telling the truth? Unfortunately, the answer to this is a bit more complicated than it initially seems. For starters, his story does match an actual incident that happened back in 1996, right down to the exact intersection he mentioned in his confession. He also added several details that didn't seem made up, and even gave a reason for why he was finally willing to confess now, because the statute of limitations had long expired. That said, there also seems to be some potential inconsistencies. Some reports claim the driver was with another passenger, and that they actually fled on foot. However, the OP not only didn't mention any passenger, but also claimed that he still had the car. He even cited its damaged condition as the reason he became aware of the accident, writing, "What was your reaction to what happened? I was too hopped up on various types of drugs to notice. It was only the day after when I saw the dried blood on my bumper." This could point to the possibility that the OP wasn't behind Ruby's accident at all. He maybe stumbled upon the 1996 article online, memorized key details like the year and the street name to make it seem real, and then fabricated the rest of the story as users pressed him with more questions. All just to get some attention on the internet. But at the end of the day, we don't know. Although if he was telling the truth, several users have already alerted California authorities of his comments. In May of 2012, a Reddit user asked others to share a secret which, if came out, could ruin their lives. And while this post received over 44,000 comments in total, one chilling confession stood out above the rest. About 9 hours after the original post went up, a user replied with a haunting story of his own, reading, "I accidentally killed 7 people. I put a rag into a new water heater exhaust to keep debris out and installed it in a rental. I get a call a week later, there's been an accident. I show up and there's a ton of EMS and police. They ask me where the gas shutoff is, and I go down to shut the gas off and see the end of the rag I forgot sticking out of the top of the heater. Rip the rag out, shut the gas off, and headed upstairs, only to be told all the tenants were dead. I drink all day now and sleep. It's killing me from the inside every single day, but if I say anything, my family is ruined. We have a bunch of rental properties and we'd be shut down." This reply caught the attention of thousands of other users who wanted more details on what exactly happened. Unfortunately for them, the account that posted this was a throwaway, and the OP didn't post a single comment after that, possibly to avoid incriminating himself any further. But when users didn't get the answers they were looking for from the OP, they began looking outward, and it didn't take long for someone to track down the news article talking about the tragic accident. According to these reports, the incident took place on December 16, 2006 in Kirksville, Missouri, where 7 victims, including 5 young adults and 2 children, passed away in their sleep due to carbon monoxide poisoning. However, while this part matched what the OP said in his comment, the conclusion the investigators reached was completely different. In his report, the police chief spearheading the investigation stated that the heating system was functioning properly and was not the source of any problem. Instead, one of the victims' vans was left running in the closed garage. This generated a lot of carbon monoxide throughout the night, which slowly filled up the apartment and eventually ended up taking the resident's life. So, did the OP really get away with killing 7 innocent people because of his gross negligence? Sadly, the answer is not as clear-cut as many would hope. There are multiple possibilities, and any one of them could be true. For instance, if we assume that OP was telling the truth from his perspective, it's completely possible that the accident did have nothing to do with the heating system. But since the OP saw the rag stuck in the heater, he assumed it was his fault and has been blaming himself ever since. On the other hand, there's also a chance that everything unfolded exactly as the investigation concluded. OP just took this real accident and made up the story about him forgetting the rag for attention on Reddit. This would also explain why the police would let him casually walk into a potential crime scene without any supervision. We can even take this a step further and assume that the OP wasn't even the landlord and just read about the incident online. That all said, it's still completely possible this story is legit and that the rag was the cause of the deaths, or perhaps a combination of the van and the rag. The OP hasn't posted any new updates on his throwaway account in the last 13 years, so whatever the truth is, we may never know for sure. On May 2nd, 2017, users on the Canada News subreddit came across a lengthy post titled, "Wanted for Kitchener Murder, My Side." This was a reference to a horrific murder that took place in Kitchener, Canada just a few days earlier. And to everyone's shock, this post was written by the prime suspect, Ager Hussein. He was still on the run but wanted to tell the internet what exactly happened on the night of the incident. However, what seemed like a desperate attempt to share his side of the story would later turn out to be a part of his plan to evade the consequences for his actions. Though the events that led up to this started 15 months earlier in February of 2016, when 21-year-old Ager Hussein met 21-year-old Melinda Vasilier in Kitchener. The two quickly became infatuated with one another and began dating just weeks after their first encounter. However, while things went quite well for the first year or so, the two eventually started bickering and fighting with each other. This resulted in the two breaking up in April 2017 via text, and that's when things took a turn for the worst. Not long after their breakup, Ager attempted to break into Melinda's home through her patio, but was spotted by her friend Anna and her boyfriend. They also called the police on him, forcing him to leave Melinda alone. However, he kept texting her even after this incident, asking to meet her at least one last time. She eventually agreed and invited him to her home, hoping to talk things through and end the relationship on respectful terms. They decided to meet on the night of April 27th, but when the time came, Ager didn't show up. Melinda had asked her friend and sister to stay with her at home while Ager was visiting. However, since Ager was a no-show, she gave them the go-ahead to carry on with their night and the two left. They returned shortly after midnight, and to their surprise discovered that Ager had shown up while they were gone and was now in Melinda's room with her. The girls confirmed Melinda's safety before heading off again to get food. This trip took barely 30 minutes, but by the time they came back, things had somehow spiraled into a complete nightmare. The apartment was in complete disarray and there was no sign of Ager anywhere. And as they stepped further into the apartment, they found Melinda lying face down on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood with her body covered in dozens of wounds. They rushed in to check on her, but tragically, it was already too late. Melinda had no pulse. After composing themselves, they contacted the police and told them everything they knew, sparking a nationwide manhunt for Ager. However, despite days of searching, the investigators were unable to find anything about his current whereabouts. That is, until a post from Ager himself popped up on Reddit explaining everything that happened from his perspective. He opened his monologue by going over the history of his and Melinda's relationship, how they were perfect together, and that he was even planning on proposing to her before everything fell apart. After spending a bit more time going over the timeline of the relationship, he moved on to talking about the day of the incident. And according to him, this is what happened after Melinda's friend and sister checked up on them. We continued to talk and finally decided it was worth it to try one more time. Anna and her other friend left the house to grab food. We both let everything out and our relationship was back on track. As I'm getting ready to leave, she asked me if I had done anything with any other girls while we were on a break, or any time we were on a break. I told her we needed to be honest and said yes and told her about it. She started freaking out, wouldn't say a word, just kept slapping me with tears in her eyes. Slaps turned into hits. I told her I was sorry, but if she didn't stop, I'd do something back. She didn't stop. I then stupidly pushed her, harder than I expected. She fell against the sink. This was the first time I ever did something physically violent towards her. I told her I was sorry. She said, leave now. I began saying sorry even more and asked if I could get a hug. She was still crying. I go up to her to try and give her a hug. Almost out of nowhere, she grabs a knife by the sink. Initially, I thought she was just going to hold it to try and tell me to leave. She doesn't. She comes at me full force, aiming towards my face. I tell her to stop. She doesn't. I tried grabbing the knife but ended up cutting my hands. After a few cuts, I lost it. I freaked out. I was scared and in a state of shock. Never in 100 years did I think she would use a knife against me. Out of shock and fear, I grab one. I hit her with it, almost blindly, a few times. I didn't know what happened. I was confused, shocked, and scared. I had no intentions of that happening. When I left, I honestly thought she just passed out. Then I looked at the blood and started freaking out and just ran. I didn't know for sure she had died until the next day. I honestly had no intention of ever doing that to her. I was protecting myself. From there, he went on to talk about the amount of regret and sadness he was feeling for what happened to Melinda. He also expressed his shock over the news calling this a targeted attack. Now, on their own, these look like the words of a man desperately trying to clear his name after an accident, when in reality, every word in this post was carefully selected by Ager to make himself look as innocent as possible. For instance, he claimed that Melinda often slapped and hit him near the beginning of his story, so that it doesn't seem suspicious when he mentions it later. When, according to people who knew her, Melinda was extremely sweet and had no violent tendencies. Ager also downplayed the break-in attempt, claiming he merely visited her house to talk, and even left out the part about Melinda getting a restraining order against him following that incident. He also mentioned that he swung his knife just a few times in self-defense, when in reality, autopsy results showed a staggering 47 different wounds on her body. Luckily, by this point the police knew that he crossed the border a few hours later and was now hiding in the US. And while it did take them a few weeks to pinpoint his location, they were eventually able to arrest and charge him with the murder of his once-girlfriend. Further investigation also revealed other twisted methods he tried to seem more innocent, like sending a message to Melinda saying, "Nice seeing you tonight, glad we worked things out. Anyways, see you soon," hours after committing the crime. He stood trial on October 2023, where the jury concluded his motive boiled down to, "If I can't have you, no one can." He was given a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 16 years. On June 7, 2019, a throwaway account made a post on the Confessions subreddit claiming to be responsible for the deaths of several people. The post opened with the OP talking about his life goal 4 years ago, how he didn't get stuck in a 9-to-5 cycle, so he came up with a different business plan, selling substances. However, this really didn't work out as well as he'd hoped. He hated meeting people in person and was constantly afraid of someone finding out who he was and where he lived. But then he learned about a popular marketplace for illicit substances on the dark web and started using that to conduct business. Things were going well, and even upgraded from selling just 3 substances to shipping several much more potent options as well. Unfortunately, what started as a major boom for his business turned into a massive disaster when he accidentally sent the wrong items for a few orders, stating, "I put all my addresses into an Excel spreadsheet along with their name, zip code, order, along with the amount. At the time, I was selling some super white powdered meth. The was also a white powder. Very similar consistency. Long story short, my Excel messed up or I messed up, and about 7 people's orders were filled in as orders. They all went out. I didn't notice and kept doing my thing for a few days. After about 5 days, someone contacted me and told me their friend died from my meth. I immediately called BS and went to check my order log and scale up how much I had of my left. Well, I had about 11 grams more than I should have. I still don't know how it could have happened. I wasn't a user, but I definitely was high." Put simply, the OP accidentally sent a much harder substance to his customers. And while I can't mention its name on YouTube, it is known to be extremely lethal in even relatively small quantities. He later searched the names of these customers online and discovered that at least 5 of them had passed away due to his mistake. The sheer gravity of his actions prompted him to immediately abandon the drug trade and rebuild his life, stating, I immediately deactivated my vendor account. I didn't even need confirmation. I knew what happened. I knew I just killed several people. I sold the rest of my drugs, converted my Bitcoin to cash, and moved away. Didn't speak to anyone for weeks. Found a job in a restaurant, living in a city I always wanted to. I haven't touched drugs since that day. I haven't had anything to do with that life since then. However, the OP ended the post by claiming that, despite getting as far away from his old life as he possibly could, the guilt of being responsible for so many lost lives still weighs heavily on him, and that the only reason he confessed everything on Reddit was to finally get it off his chest, hoping it might bring him some sense of relief. Now, whether this actually helped him feel any better or not is completely unknown. This was his first and last post from this account, and he hasn't posted any updates since. As for if he was actually telling the truth, that much is uncertain. It's near impossible for me to track down any news articles about his unfortunate customers, given that over 100,000 people every year lose their lives from that same substance. That said, many users in the comments believe the story was genuine, and some even express sympathy for the OP's situation, though I doubt we'll get any concrete answer on this confession's legitimacy anytime soon. Alex from Tennessee. On April 24, 2013, an anonymous 4chan user posted an image from Google Maps with a cryptic caption reading, "By this rubble your prize awaits, Tennessee. Park nearby and walk to this point for the secret. It's under plastic at this point. Good luck." The image appeared to be an aerial view screenshot of a random location in the town of Elizabethton, Tennessee. In the screenshot, there was a pin marking the exact location of the coordinates the user had entered. If you enter the coordinates into Google Maps today, you'll find a bunch of dilapidated, sketchy-looking old buildings. At first, other users played the post off as a joke, with some mentioning that the OP was probably crazy or just looking for internet attention. But a little less than 20 minutes later, the uploader once again became active on the thread and answered everyone's remarks by saying, "No one shall claim the prize, time to try other websites." While other 4chaners debated amongst themselves in regards to what kind of prize the uploader was talking about, the OP himself responded to the speculations with the comment, "It is warm." Over the next couple of hours, the OP proceeded to post a series of strange and ominous messages in the thread, such as, "No cops here," "Someone coming for the prize," and "Little friend fly away, why is no one coming, see?" With this last comment, he also posted an image of what appears to be the claw from an unidentified animal lying on the grass. The extremely long fingernails and disturbing nature of the image were unsettling enough, but the thread was only about to get more eerie. A little less than 2 hours after the original post, the OP continued posting strange comments. At 10:23 p.m. he said, "I am angry you are not here. My friend moves. My friend is not the prize." A few minutes later, the OP commented, "Plastic prize," and "I've had my friend for long now, not what matters today, I need people to come." Seeing that nobody was claiming his so-called prize, the OP then uploaded 2 images to the thread. In the first grainy image, we can see what appears to be some sort of dark room or dungeon, while the second image is a picture of a handwritten note with the words, "Please come, Wednesday, April 24th, 2013. The last message shared by the OP in the thread was, "Singing tonight, someone come." After that, the uploader went completely quiet, and it wasn't until 5 nights later that the thread had an important update. At around 9:45 p.m. on April 29th, a user simply named Alex uploaded a series of comments and images in a follow-up thread in which he mentioned that he was at the location posted by the original anonymous user. With his comments and pictures, Alex narrated what he saw inside the dark, mysterious location, posting updates periodically for his fellow 4chaners. Disturbingly, the images he uploaded seemed to get more unsettling as the night went on. First, he uploaded a few pictures of plastic garbage bags and other images showing his general surroundings, but when he showed the bag's contents, things got a little darker. As per the images, the bag contains what appears to be a mummified pelvic bone and a styrofoam plate with a messy inscription that reads, "Plate's a date, a very important mate, you shouldn't have come, I lied." He then uploaded an ominous image of a bunch of prescription pills in their containers surrounded by dust and cobwebs. Unfazed by the creepy message on the plate, Alex continued to investigate the mysterious underground location, until he mentioned in one of the comments that he heard a car coming and decided to head out. This was his last post. Window thing isn't a window, it's some other vent thing. Turning around and leaving around through wood door. Jesus. After this post, Alex was never heard from again. Following the disturbing series of posts, many people were left wondering if something had happened to him. Although many users were concerned about Alex's safety, it's unlikely that anything bad happened to him. There seemed to be no records of murders or kidnappings in Elizabethton, Tennessee from that time, and a case like this would surely have been on the news. This leaves the question of whether or not Alex's experience was genuine. Although the images he uploaded are definitely creepy and appear to have been taken at the actual location, there are some clues in the post that indicate he could have been lying about his whereabouts while he was uploading the images and comments. If we look at the average span of time that went by between his posts, we can see that he was posting pretty much once a minute, which is an insane posting speed for someone who is visiting a dangerous, unknown location for the first time. This makes it much more likely that Alex had the pictures handy on his desktop and was uploading them in rapid succession to make it seem as if he was a random 4chaner who went to go claim the mysterious prize. The most widely accepted possibility in this rabbit hole is that Alex was also the original anonymous uploader and just wanted to mess with people by creating an internet mystery. Although there still isn't a real clear conclusion to the story. 5 years after the original discussion took place on 4chan, in a video that's since been deleted, a YouTuber by the name of Noah went to the location and went into the abandoned old buildings. Inside, he found what looked like the belongings of the homeless people who probably lived there, but other than that, there wasn't much to look at. It's more than likely that Alex fabricated the entire story to gain internet attention, but because this was never confirmed, the mystery has been kept alive by various other YouTubers and uploaders in online forums, as people continue to search for a definitive explanation. Thrift store discoveries. Thrift stores have certain guidelines and rules regarding the kinds of items they can receive from donors. This helps prevent the stores from getting filled with damaged, unusable, or illegal items, and most of the time the screening process is pretty effective. However, due to the large volume of donations that many stores receive, it's often impossible to keep track of absolutely everything that comes in. As a result, buyers oftentimes end up finding all kinds of unexpected items in thrift stores, ranging from the cool and unlikely to the jarring and extremely disturbing. An example of this is this image that was allegedly found in a photo album at a Goodwill in Washington. The image originally started gaining attention in the online forum Reddit when it was uploaded by a woman who claimed that it was originally posted on a true crime Facebook group. The woman who uploaded it to Facebook allegedly deleted it after people started spamming her inbox with questions about the jarring image. The image in question shows two men in a small creek with their hands bound behind their backs. Disturbingly, one of them is face down in the water, while the other one sits upright. In the foreground, the shadow of what looks like a man holding a weapon can be seen. According to the Reddit post, the woman who uploaded it to Facebook knew someone who had bought a photo album at a Goodwill in Washington. The album was allegedly empty, except for this one photo. Immediately after it was posted to Reddit, people started speculating and coming up with possible explanations for the image. One of the initial theories that gained a lot of traction online was that the image could have been a part of a low-budget horror or crime film. Others speculated that the image shows some kind of military training or fraternity hazing ritual. It's also possible that the image shows a real crime scene where someone might have abducted two men, thrown them in the river in handcuffs, and held them at gunpoint. The fact that this was never confirmed makes the image all the more creepy, and people have continued searching for explanations to this day. In my research, I found that this isn't the only unexpected picture that's been found in thrift stores in the past couple of decades. As it turns out, cursed thrift store finds are almost an entire genre of their own in several online communities, with people uploading images of the strange, cool, and unlikely objects they've found in random thrift stores all over the internet every day. In January 2023, a TikTok user by the name of JC uploaded a video with the caption, "When I bought a camera at Goodwill in Arizona and found a SIM card in it that had photos of my dad who lives in Idaho." In the second part of the video, the user shows her laptop screen where she downloaded the photos from the camera. One of the blurry images featured in the TikTok, which appears to have been taken from below, shows the uploader's dad with a smirk on his face. In the caption, JC claimed that as soon as she saw the picture, she was so caught off guard that she immediately called her dad. Although thousands of TikTok users asked her for an update, she never explained where the image came from or how the camera ended up in Arizona if her dad lives in Idaho. Although it might seem like a 1 in a million chance to find a picture like this in a SIM card, it turns out that the occurrence of these coincidences is actually pretty common. In JC's TikTok, several people jumped in the comments to talk about the time something similar had happened to them. One user commented, "One time my grandma found a wedding album at the thrift store and it had pics of me and my mom because we attended." Another user commented, "I work at a thrift store. I found a ripped up old Christmas photo of my aunt's family on a shelf in a pile one day. They don't live in the same town." The further I went down the rabbit hole, the more disturbing the thrift shop finds seemed to get, with some of them being incredibly creepy. In September 2023, Goodwill employees at a store in Goodyear, Arizona were sorting through a donations box when they came across a real human skull. After reporting the incident to the police, an investigation was launched to determine if it was a part of some sort of crime. Fortunately, police determined that the person had died of natural causes. Though this obviously doesn't explain how the skull even got into the donations box, and the investigation is still ongoing. Creepy thrift store finds have become increasingly popular since the birth of online forums, and it's likely that many of the mysteries surrounding these strange and often terrifying pictures and objects will never be solved. UVB-76. Since the 1970s, a Russian shortwave radio station has been broadcasting on the frequencies 4625 and 4810 kHz. The station is still active, and depending on where you are in the world, you can still tune in to listen. For over 50 years, the station has been broadcasting a short, monotonous buzz that plays for 24 hours a day at about 25 tones per minute. This is what it sounds like. Before 2010, the physical station was located in a bunker in the town of Pavravo near Moscow. But one day in 2010, the station went silent for about a day, and when it reappeared, the broadcast was coming from a different location in St. Petersburg. After September 2010, the call sign of the radio station also changed from UVB-76 to MDZHB. Since then, the call sign has been changed multiple times, and as of 2019, ANVF is the most commonly used call sign for the station. Much of what we know about what the original station in Pavravo looked like is thanks to the testimony and images that was uploaded to different blogs and websites by several users who visited the station after it was abandoned. In 2011, a blogger who goes by the name of WASD uploaded hundreds of pictures to his blog from his trip to where the UVB-76 station used to be housed. After visiting, he said, "It is worth mentioning that the bunker is a quiet and deserted dark place, somewhat similar to a labyrinth with a bunch of corridors and rooms. It's better not to go there without a flashlight because there's absolutely nothing to light there. It's completely dark." As of today, the original station has been out of order for years. The buzz that can be heard in the broadcast is pretty unsettling in itself, and this is part of the reason why UVB-76 has become an extremely popular internet rabbit hole. At certain points during the broadcast, the buzz breaks up and a male Russian voice can be heard reciting encoded messages in the form of numbers and letters. Another detail that has caught the attention of listeners is that the frequency at which the voice can be heard reciting the encoded messages is not regular at all. This is what it would sound like. When the station was first launched, the voice only interrupted the constant buzzing once every few months, but ever since the station was moved, it's been heard with increasing frequency. Strangely, the voice has also been heard in the days leading up to important international events, such as when Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. This has caused many people to speculate about the purpose of UVB-76, with many people thinking that it's been used since its creation for spy communications. Others suggest it may be a counterattack measure for nuclear war, but after looking around on various Russian websites and forums, I was able to find a much more likely theory. In several Russian forums, it's common to find discussions on UVB-76 in which ex-military members debunk the myths that have circulated around the station for decades. Those familiar with the Russian military have explained that because the codes are constantly being changed, recycled, and transformed, it's pretty much impossible to know what exactly is being said on the station without the key. But far from being used to send messages to spies, the most likely possibility is that the voice messages are being used for Russian military drills and other basic military activities. From what I was able to find, the purpose of the continuous noise is just to stop others from broadcasting over the same frequency. Ultimately, there are hundreds of other radio stations around the world with a signature placeholder to prevent others from broadcasting on that frequency. And although this has given rise to one of the most popular internet mysteries of the decade, the reality behind UVB-76 is probably a lot less dark and mysterious than many people seem to think. The disappearance of Doveland, Wisconsin. If you've ever gone digging around for internet rabbit holes, you might have heard of a town called Dovland, Wisconsin. If the name sounds unfamiliar, Dovland is described by users in online forums and groups as a small town in Wisconsin that housed hundreds of military families in the previous century. And it's often mentioned that the town was made for the sole purpose of building Project Sanguine. Project Sanguine was a US Navy project proposed in 1968 to improve communications with submerged submarines using extremely low-frequency radio waves. The initially proposed system for Project Sanguine, which was meant to survive a full-fledged nuclear attack, would have required a giant antenna consisting of 6,000 miles of buried cables in a rectangular grid covering 2/5 of the state of Wisconsin. Although this system was never implemented because of protests from residents of neighboring towns, several sources claim that a smaller, modified system was built in Dovland in the 70s. At first, the story of Dovland might not sound like anything out of the ordinary, except for one detail. It's long been believed that at some point in the 1990s, the entire town of Dovland, Wisconsin somehow disappeared off the face of the earth. Strangely, Dovland doesn't appear on any maps, and if you look up information on the town today, you won't find any official reports about its history, which is incredibly strange considering that over the years, a huge number of internet users have claimed to have relatives who used to live in the town. For example, a user named Jamie Ivanov posted the following account of the rural town on Reddit. I just learned of all the noise surrounding Dovland, and I think I can add some insight. Dovland was a small town in Wisconsin that housed a lot of military families. My father lived there for a year or two and spoke of it occasionally. The main thing I remember is that it had to do with Project Sanguine in the early 60s. I don't think it was X-Files type stuff, but the town was destroyed after an incident. I thought they were digging up a ton of land for something and they flooded the town or something, but this is a rehashed secondhand memory from years ago. In several online forums, websites, and groups, people have also uploaded pictures of shirts, mugs, and other souvenirs from the town. One particular post on the obscure Urban Legends Wikia page even features a photo that was supposedly recovered from Dovland, Wisconsin. The image in question shows a middle-aged waiter sitting next to a young woman who puts her arm around him as they both smile at the camera. On the right-hand side, a young kid can also be seen sitting across the table from them. Although the image has been reposted in many online forums and groups, there seems to be no evidence at all that suggests the picture was actually taken at a restaurant in the allegedly vanished town. In the past decade, many people have also reported a digital ghost trace of Dovland in the form of Google search autocorrect and recommended search options suggesting the term Dovland, Wisconsin. But mysteriously, the suggestion doesn't lead the user anywhere in particular, which is added to the mystery surrounding the town. Throughout these past 2 decades, reports of vanished towns have been pretty common in the online mystery and horror community, but there's one thing in particular that makes Dovland stand out from other urban legends of towns that have disappeared off the face of the earth. Some of the most notorious vanished towns have been found to be part of different alternate reality games, or even online publicity campaigns for movies and video games. But from my research, nothing like this can be linked to Dovland, Wisconsin, and everything seems to indicate that this town never actually existed. The earliest mention I was able to find of the town was in a 2015 Tumblr post, in which a user asked if anyone had ever heard of the small rural town of Dovland, Wisconsin, after which the OP discussed the main theories behind the phenomenon of the alleged vanished town. One of the more far-fetched theories that has gained traction in online forums is that Dovland did exist back in the day, but a freak accident that occurred during Project Sanguine somehow shifted the entire town into another dimension, or we shifted into a reality where the town never existed. Obviously, this is a bit of a stretch, but a more down-to-earth theory is that something did happen during Project Sanguine that turned the entire town of Dovland into an uninhabitable wasteland, forcing the military to cover up their mistake by evacuating the families that lived there and destroying the entire town. Many users seem to favor this theory, but the fact that most accounts of the town's existence have come from online users and not from people who actually live there or from residents of neighboring towns suggests that the whole thing might be an example of mass delusion, which brings us to a more realistic and widely accepted theory. Although it's unlikely that a large number of users met in secret and agreed to spread lies about the town across various online platforms just to mess with people, it is possible that Dovland, Wisconsin is an example of what social psychologists call the Mandela effect. The Mandela effect describes an eerie phenomenon whereby a large number of people collectively misremember events, historical facts, and other famous pop culture moments, such as when people misremember Ilsa Lund's line from Casablanca as "Play it again, Sam." In the movie, the real line is "Play it once, Sam," but many people swear they remember it differently. With all the memorabilia of Dublin that has emerged online in the past decade, it's possible that certain residents of Wisconsin associated the name of the town with another town they had visited, which could have led to the mass confusion that became apparent in various online forums. The Google recommended search and autocorrect bug that is still active today could simply be the result of thousands of people worldwide searching for the town, bumping up the importance of the town's name in the algorithm, which could also explain the emergence of souvenirs from Dublin. As often happens when new trends take over the internet, the rise of memorabilia from the fictitious town was most likely an attempt to make a few dollars by people who use bots to find trending topics in forums and automatically generate merchandise related to them. Although this seems to be the most likely theory, the Dublin, Wisconsin phenomenon is extremely odd and has no clear conclusion on whether or not it actually ever existed, which has contributed to its status as one of the most mysterious rabbit holes of the decade. Bermeja. If you were to look at pretty much any map of the Gulf of Mexico drawn by Spanish explorers in the 16th and 17th centuries, you would find a small island lying off the north coast of the Yucatan Peninsula called Bermeja. Although the exact location of the island varied slightly depending on the map, it was a well-known fact that the island at least existed. Bermeja was first mentioned by Spanish cartographer Alonso de Santa Cruz in an official list of islands in the Gulf of Mexico, published in Madrid in 1539. Alonso de Chaves, another Spanish cartographer, once wrote that from a distance, Bermeja looked blondish or reddish, which is where the island's name came from. A couple of hundred years later, in the mid-1800s, French-Mexican cartographers published reports stating that the island of Bermeja had started to sink. By the late 18th century, Bermeja was no longer featured in many maps of the area, and the last time it showed up on an official map was in the 1921 edition of the Geographic Atlas of the Mexican Republic. In the late 90s, the American and Mexican governments started negotiations to determine the boundaries for the exploitation rights of oil in the Gulf of Mexico. If the Mexican government could find the island of Bermeja, that would expand Mexico's oil drilling rights way further into the Gulf. Around that time, the Mexican government conducted 3 official investigations to find the island, armed with state-of-the-art ultrasound technology and all kinds of modern tools to locate it. Mysteriously, they couldn't find any trace of the island, and according to spokespeople from the Mexican Navy, it was as if the island had never even existed. A year after the Mexican Navy failed to find Bermeja, a Mexican senator named José Angel Cioncielo, who was one of the most fierce advocates for the expansion of Mexico's oil drilling territory and the island's existence, was killed in a car accident on a Mexican highway when a semi-truck slammed into the right side of the car. His death quickly became the fuel for a conspiracy theory, according to which the CIA had blown up the island to further an oil-fueled American agenda. Of course, this theory is a bit of a stretch, and some of the other more logical theories that surfaced regarding the disappearance of the island are much more likely to be true. One possibility that researchers seem to favor is that the island sunk after an earthquake or underwater landslide, which led to a further series of explorations in 2009 to see if the remains could be found at the bottom of the ocean. However, despite the even more advanced technologies that were used during that year's official investigations, the ultrasound exploration of the ocean floor revealed absolutely nothing but a sandy ocean bottom. Speculation that the island had never existed once again started circulating online and in the news, leading many people to adopt it as the truth. After the failed explorations in 2009, Julio Zamora, president of the Mexican Society of Geography, claimed that the existence of the island of Bermeja had probably been faked by early Spanish explorers to throw off other explorers and military rivals from other countries. This would make sense, as it was common practice to make slightly inaccurate maps back then for the sake of strategy. Another possible theory is that the island could have been drawn by one cartographer in the wrong location by mistake and replicated dozens of times over the centuries by other unaware cartographers. Still, some researchers think that due to the very precise descriptions of the island's physical appearance, Bermeja probably did exist, but in another location. Despite the abundance of theories regarding the mysterious island's location and existence, 15 years after the last exploration of the last known location of Bermeja, the truth is still a mystery and will probably remain that way forever. Overton Bridge. Built in 1895 in Dumbarton, Scotland, the Overton Bridge is a Gothic-style bridge overlooking a 50-foot ravine that leads up to Overton House, a 19th century manor in the Scottish Lowlands. At first glance, Overton Bridge looks pretty much like any other bridge from the time, but there's one pretty dark detail that makes it different from any other structure in the area. For the past 80 years, hundreds of dogs have been jumping off the bridge and down to the ravine to their deaths for seemingly no apparent reason. Sometimes the dogs survive the fall and are left with debilitating injuries, and according to some reports, there have even been instances where dogs allegedly jumped off the bridge, survived, ran up the slope, and then jumped off once again to their deaths. Depending on the source, you'll find reports stating that the amount of dogs that have jumped off the bridge is either lower than 100 or in the high 100s. But regardless of the exact number, it's a fact that a lot of dogs have died at this bridge for some mysterious reason. As you can imagine, these incidents at Overton Bridge have fueled all kinds of outlandish theories, including suggestions that the bridge is haunted. According to Celtic pagan beliefs, the bridge is located at a thin place, which is a place that lies at the supposed union between heaven and earth. Some locals have also favored more supernatural theories, with many people blaming the dog's death on the White Lady of Overton, the alleged ghost of the widow from Overton House. Another popular theory among the locals is that the dogs are being affected by negative residual energy from a tragic event that took place in 1994, in which a 32-year-old father threw his baby off the bridge, claiming that his child was the Antichrist. Following the tragic murder, the father was declared insane and locked up in a psych ward. But even with all the more outlandish theories that have gained traction in recent years, some researchers have come up with more plausible explanations for the mysterious incidents at Overton Bridge. In 2006, animal behaviorist David Sands investigated the bridge and suggested that the dogs are probably detecting the presence of wild animals below the bridge with their keen sense of smell, which makes them chase after the smell and inadvertently jumping to their deaths. This would make sense, as according to official statistics in the area, minks began breeding in large numbers in the 50s in Scotland, and most long-nosed dogs seem to favor the smell of mink over any other small animal, including squirrels. From my research, most of the dogs that have died at the bridge are long-nosed breeds. Also, because the bridge has tapered edges, from the dog's point of view, the edge looks more like a flat plane, safe for running and chasing after small animals. So, while there will probably continue to be speculation about paranormal activity at Overton Bridge for many years to come, it's much more likely that the dogs aren't intentionally taking their lives and are simply falling to their deaths on accident while chasing the odors from other animals. Abandoned Viaduct Petrobras. In the 1950s, the Brazilian government began a project to build BR-101, Brazil's longest highway spanning almost 3,000 miles. In the 1960s, construction began on a segment of highway called the Viaduct Petrobras that was meant to cross the Brazilian jungle to connect Rio de Janeiro and Santos, São Paulo. 16 years after construction started, the segment of highway that crossed the jungle was due to be connected to an already existing part of the highway to finish the project. However, due to Brazil's economic crisis, plans changed at the very last minute, and instead of connecting the viaduct to the existing road, the highway was linked to a different coastal route. As a result, the Viaduct Petrobras was left abandoned in the middle of the jungle, and to this day, the Brazilian government has done nothing to remove it or reuse its parts. Standing over 130 feet tall and almost 1,000 feet long, the structure features fully built tunnels, retaining walls, and a gigantic concrete foundation, which has slowly been swallowed by the jungle as the years have gone by. To an outsider, the Viaduct Petrobras looks like it was taken out of the city and dropped in the middle of nowhere in the South American jungle for no reason, giving off an admittedly eerie atmosphere. Even though the Viaduct Petrobras seems pretty wasteful, the out-of-place structure is now a pretty popular tourist destination for curious travelers and locals wanting to catch a glimpse of the abandoned concrete giant. Kola Super Deep Borehole. In the 1960s, the Soviet Union and the US were locked in a battle to develop superior space exploration technologies, often referred to as the space race. But what many people don't know is that the two countries were also competing to drill as close as possible to the center of the Earth. As is often the case, the motivation behind the drilling was mostly to find oil and valuable minerals, but from what I found, developing machines that can get close to the center of the Earth would also help understand the causes of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions at a much deeper level. In 1958, the US government launched Project Mohawk to collect a sample from Earth's mantle by drilling to the bottom of the ocean off Guadalupe Island in Mexico. Over the next 8 years, they drilled over 600 feet into the seabed, but in 1966, the House of Representatives had to discontinue the project because it was getting too expensive. 4 years later in 1970, it was the Soviet Union's turn, and they drilled their hole close to the Barents Sea just outside the Norwegian border in a city known as Murmansk, Russia. At the time, the Soviets' goal was to drill as far down as possible, which researchers hoped would be a little over 9 miles. Unlike the US, the Soviets were a little more successful with their attempt and managed to drill way deeper into the Earth's crust, which resulted in the creation of the Kola Super Deep Borehole, also known as the world's deepest man-made hole. With a total depth of over 40,000 feet, or around 7.5 miles, the Kola Super Deep Borehole is deeper than the Mariana Trench, and its depth surpasses the height of Mount Everest. As the project progressed, the scientists realized the temperature was much higher than expected at every point below 10,000 feet, and at around 7.5 miles below the surface, the drill reported a temperature of almost 360 Fahrenheit. This was way higher than the 212 degrees Fahrenheit the scientists had predicted at that depth. So even though the Soviets had broken a record with the Kola borehole, they too had to discontinue the project in 1992 due to increasing rock densities and crazy high temperatures. And in 2005, the drill was shut down and the hole was sealed for good. However, that wasn't the end of the story, and there's a slightly more disturbing reason why people remember the Kola Super Deep Borehole. In the late 80s, a strange story started circulating in several Christian Finnish newspapers, which reported that a group of Soviet scientists had drilled a hole to the center of the Earth and had allegedly lowered an extremely heat-tolerant microphone into the hole. Through this, they supposedly heard a series of extremely disturbing, tormented screams coming from the bottom of the well. Throughout the 90s, the story spread to other countries, until even American newspapers were running it. As the story gained popularity, sound files with the supposed audio of the tormented screams from the center of the Earth started appearing everywhere online, with allegations that the screams came from tormented souls stuck in hell. As it was later revealed, the original recording of tormented screams was made from a loop of various sound effects and the soundtrack from the 1972 movie Barren Blood. From this point forward, it was pretty much common knowledge that the screams were fake. However, it is a fact that some pretty disturbing sounds have been heard coming from the Kola Super Deep Borehole, along with other super deep boreholes. In 2013, Dutch artist Lotte Gieven traveled to the 30,000-foot deep KTB Super Deep Borehole in Germany, where she lowered a microphone protected by a thermal shield to see if she could pick up any sounds at the bottom of the well. Interestingly, a mysterious deep rumbling sound that scientists couldn't explain could be heard through the microphone, which in the artist's own words, some people thought sounded like hell, while others thought they could hear the planet breathe. Even though the sound is pretty cool to hear, even if a little haunting, the consensus among scientists is that the sound comes from layers and layers of rocks rearranging themselves after being moved around by the drill that made the hole. Potomsky Crater. In 1949, a Russian geologist named Vadim Kolpakov stumbled upon a mysterious crater with a diameter of over 500 feet and a height of almost 140 feet in Irkutsk, Siberia. At the center of the crater, he found a little hill around 40 feet tall, which kind of looked like an eagle's nest with an egg inside it. Curious to find out what was inside the crater, Kolpakov made plans to climb the mound and take a look inside to confirm his hypothesis that the crater had been caused by a meteorite. But the locals warned him that Fire Eagle Nest, as it's become known all over the world, allegedly possessed evil powers, and whoever stepped inside it would be dead soon after. Dismissing the insistent warnings as superstition, he climbed the mound, but failed to find any rock samples that supported his meteorite hypothesis. Over time, more and more expeditions were carried out to the crater, including one in 2005 in which the leader of the investigation died of a heart attack shortly after visiting the crater. Based on the findings of recent explorations, scientists have ruled out volcanic eruptions, nuclear explosions, and impact from a meteorite as possible causes for the crater. In the absence of a solid answer, some have started coming up with all kinds of theories to explain its origin, including the possibility that a UFO landing made the crater. Others have linked the crater to the Tunguska meteorite, the remains of which have never been discovered. One of the things that makes it so difficult to determine the origin of Fire Eagle Nest, or Kolpakov Cone as it's now popularly known, is that the crater frequently changes shape, which suggests that whatever caused it is still affecting it to this day. The only thing scientists know for sure is that the crater is around 250 years old, which they gathered from the rings on the trees growing on the mound. Strangely, it's been scientifically proven that the trees closer to the crater grow much faster than normal, which is similar to what happened in the forests around Chernobyl after the nuclear disaster. The lack of solid explanations, coupled with the weird tree phenomenon, has been fuel to the fire of outlandish conspiracy theories about underground nuclear plants and nuclear-powered UFOs buried beneath the crater. To this day, scientists still haven't determined what caused Kolpakov cone to appear, and no asteroid fragments or metal parts have been found in the crater to support some of the theories people have come up with over the years. As of today, the most logical explanation is that the mound could have been caused by the underground release of hydrogen fluids and heat from a nearby gas volcano. This could have caused changes in the size of tree rings, which would explain why scientists thought they were growing at an abnormal rate. Still, despite the more convincing explanations that have surfaced over the years, the origin of Kolpakov cone will probably remain a mystery for many years to come. Villa Epicune. In the 1920s, a small tourist village about 400 miles from Buenos Aires, Argentina, called Villa Epicune was built along the shore of Lago Epicune, a salt lake touted for the health benefits and therapeutic effects of its mineral waters, which were said to be beneficial for rheumatic conditions. Quickly turning into a weekend getaway for Argentina's upper class, the town soon had a functional railroad station and a population of about 1,500 with a capacity to accommodate around 5,000 additional visitors at its peak in the 70s. Due to its popularity as a weekend getaway for Argentine city dwellers, a lot of money was poured into Villa Epicune to expand its accommodations and make it as comfortable as possible for visitors. However, it seemed not a lot of resources or attention was dedicated to the containment dam that separated the lake from the town. Unfortunately, on November 10, 1985, the containment dam broke during a storm and a series of unusual strong winds. For 2 weeks, the water rose at a rate of half an inch per hour, until eventually the containment dam was completely destroyed by the water, after which all the locals had to abandon their homes and businesses and leave behind Villa Epicune. Over the following days, the flood drowned the town over 30 feet underwater, and it wasn't until 25 years later in 2009 that the waters began to recede and now show the eerie remains of the town, which now looks like something out of a dystopian movie. From above, you can see the original layout of the streets of Villa Epicune, along with its many businesses and the houses 1,500 people called home. With its overgrown trees, rusty post-apocalyptic appearance, and ghost town vibes, Villa Epicune now draws in tourists and photographers from all over the world who want to get a glimpse of the ruins of the once bustling getaway town. Due to the high levels of salt in the water that once flooded the town, most of the buildings in Villa Epicune are covered with a thin white residue, giving the town an even more creepy appearance. One of the more interesting facts about Villa Epicune is that even after it was completely destroyed by the water and flooded for more than 25 years, as soon as the water receded in 2009, one of the locals, then 81-year-old Pablo Novak, decided to come back home and live out the rest of his days in Villa Epicune. Out of the original 1,500 residents of the town, Pablo was the only one who came back. As the lone inhabitant of Villa Epicune, Novak was officially named a cultural ambassador of the town in 2020. But unfortunately, in January 2024, Pablo Novak passed away at the age of 93, leaving the town once again completely abandoned. SeeMeRot.com. In February of 2004, a user on a now outdated message board asked other members about a strangely morbid site they recently came across. The post read, SeeMeRot.com. Is this coffin webcam real? I recently visited www.seemerot.com, which is a live webcam inside a coffin that is taping a woman in her 40s who passed away from natural causes. Something isn't right here. They claim it's real, but there is very loose wording under the disclaimer. Someone please help clear this up. Is it a hoax? There seems like there are too many loose ends here. There has to be more to the story than this. Visiting this site today leads to an Australian fashion and lifestyle blog that has nothing to do with what this post was talking about. Fortunately, this domain has been extensively archived by the Wayback Machine over the years, allowing us to go back in time and see how it used to look in August of 2003. And sure enough, it was just as bizarre as the OP mentioned in their post. Its logo was the site's name over a picture of a coffin, with an ominous caption tagline reading, "Being dead and buried doesn't mean you can't have friends over." Below this was a supposed live view from within a coffin, featuring two cameras pointed at the deceased face and feet. Live streaming video over the internet wasn't really a thing back then, so these were more akin to images that were updated periodically. These images were too low res and hard to decipher, even for 2003 standards, hinting that this whole thing might have been nothing more than a hoax. But less than a month later, the site's owner replaced them with a much clearer picture of the person in the coffin. It showed what was supposed to be the final resting place of a young woman in a light blue button-up shirt. This new feed also refreshed every 10 seconds with an updated picture. However, the most disturbing part of this website wasn't the coffin stream, but the description beside it. It opened with the site's owner providing a detailed play-by-play of what exactly they did to get this live preview, stating, "Welcome to seemerot.com. This site is dedicated to all who have gone before us. 2 months ago, we attached the world's first live coffin cams to the interior of our subject's casket. This was done after friends and family had seen the deceased for the last time. We then traveled over 2,000 miles with the casket to the family's chosen burial place, undisclosed to protect gravesite. Having arrived at the graveyard, a small ceremony was held, after which the final preparations were made to our transmitting hardware and lighting units. All went according to plan at first, and the casket was lowered just after lunchtime, April 15, 2003. Cam tests were carried out at the site and the grave was sealed. We then set off back to our office in the heart of Seattle." This description ended with the site's owner urging readers to contact them if they wanted a coffin cam for their loved ones as well. So the whole purpose of this site appeared to be an advertisement for their disturbing service, which left visitors with more questions than it answered. Like, who in their right mind would want to see the decay of their friends and family after their passing? But while people were figuring that out, seemerot.com became a phenomenon on the early internet, with people talking about it on forums, prompting even more flock to the site out of sheer curiosity. It even got picked up by mainstream media like the QI, or Quite Interesting show from the UK. The biggest question most visitors had, however, was whether it was actually legit. Were these images really from the inside of a coffin? Well, as it turned out, seemerot.com was nothing more than a hoax. Some savvy users quickly figured out that the live preview wasn't live at all. Instead, it was the looping GIF of a still image that went in and out of focus to emulate a live digital camera from that era. This also explains why the supposed body didn't change one bit in the 10 years the site was up. But this begs the question, why? Why would someone go through the effort of setting up a whole website centered around this false premise? The creator even went as far as to add a legal section with disclaimers about how this was all being done with consent, all in an effort to make it seem more legit. One of the first explanations that comes to mind is that this was an art project of sorts. Though, a closer look at this site suggests that its creation was driven more by profit than by artistic intent. You see, this site has had advertisements on its homepage, often for adult content from its inception, something that was very common in the early internet days. A site called the Museum of Hoaxes even managed to track down the site's registration address to some adult business in West Hollywood, California. Put simply, the creator of seemerot.com created this hoax to entice visits from around the world and then leverage those visits to earn money from sponsors. As for the images featured on the site, who these people are is still unknown, but they were likely taken by the creators themselves, possibly one of their friends, as I wasn't able to find any record of them on the internet from before the site went up. seemerot.com was ultimately shut down in 2013. It has since changed owners multiple times between different businesses, including a coffee company and now a fashion and lifestyle blog from a tiny remote town in Australia. That said, the identity of the original creator remains a mystery to this day. They exhibited some odd behavior over the years, like continuing to update the site to make its, and by extension their coffin cam business, seem more legit, despite the internet figuring things out by 2004. At one point, they even made up a story about the police confiscating their camera equipment. It's now been over 12 years since the original site was up. Mortis.com. In early 2010, a bored 4chan user was typing random URLs in their browser, hoping to stumble across something interesting. And while most URLs they tried were either unavailable or belonged to some business, one caught their attention almost immediately: Mortis.com. It was a completely black page with nothing but a generic login window in the middle. There was no logo or description that could help visitors understand what the website was about. This mysterious landing page, combined with Mortis roughly translating to "of death" in Latin, piqued this user's curiosity. But without a valid username and password, there was nothing he could do to investigate further. With no other option, he turned to 4chan and made a post about the site on its technology board. What he didn't realize at the time, however, was that this would spark a decades-long mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Now, I should mention that while some still remain, a significant portion of the discussion threads and forum posts regarding Mortis.com have since vanished from the internet, including the wiki page users created to keep track of all their findings. Any backups of Mortis.com have also been deleted from the Internet Archive upon a request from the site's owner. In other words, whoever this owner is, they do not want people digging into this. The Mortis.com site also went down sometime in 2011, possibly because people started trying to brute force its login requirements by using special software to try millions of username and password combinations, so the owner took it down. Now, most of these attempts led nowhere, but a few more tech-savvy individuals managed to extract valuable information from the site's code before it went offline. Most interesting among these was the fact that it was originally registered all the way back in November of 1997 by a man named Thomas Ling. This allowed users to discover 24 other websites under that same name, but instead of offering clarity, the discovery of these additional sites only made the mystery more convoluted. Take Cthulhu.net for instance, which was named after the eldritch monster created by H.P. Lovecraft. It was just a black page with the text "Dead but Dreaming" written on it, and nothing else. Some users also claim to have seen a version of this site with a white chess piece on it, though I wasn't able to find any archives containing that detail. Either way, the whole thing was deeply puzzling and mysterious. That said, not all sites under Thomas's name were this empty. Exercio.com led to a landing page with 4 different options. Among these, quilts.html was the most notable, as it led to a page about someone sharing pictures of their quilting projects. And while this doesn't look all that important to the Mortis.com mystery at first glance, in actuality, it holds the key to answering everything, or at least getting as close to the answer as we can. But we'll get to that a bit later, because there's another key piece of this puzzle that we haven't discussed yet. You see, while people were snooping around the Mortis.com code and the emails relating to its domain, they discovered terabytes of encrypted data connected to this site, which is an unheard of amount of data for the late 90s. Some individual files in this collection were as large as 39 gigabytes, which got people even more curious about what this site was hiding behind its login page. Theories included everything from a private collection of illegal explicit material to something connected to the 3-letter agencies like the CIA or FBI. However, while people were trying to figure this out, Thomas allegedly contacted one of the investigators and told him to stop trying to hack his site. As the story goes, Thomas also claimed that these files were nothing more than the photos and videos from his wedding, which would have been a reasonable explanation if these files were only a few gigabytes in size, not terabytes. A more reasonable theory, one that I personally believe in as well, is that Thomas was pirating movies and other media and using Mortis.com to host them online. This way he could easily consume this media from any device with an internet connection while also being able to share it with all his friends and family. This would also explain why he was so reluctant about people finding out the truth, as it could land him in some trouble with the authorities. Most importantly, this theory isn't completely baseless either. While looking through the data connected to Mortis.com, one 4chan user stumbled upon a 25 gigabyte file with a seemingly gibberish name of DriveCrazy3DBD25.part2. However, looking up DriveCrazy3D followed by movie brings up results relating to a 2011 film by Nicolas Cage called Drive Angry 3D. With that, we can decipher the rest of the name as well, with BD likely being the short form of Blu-ray disc and 25 referring to its size in gigabytes. Put simply, Mortis.com was likely nothing more than a pirated media server. As for its ominous name, it's possible he chose Mortis just because it sounded cool. The only big questions that remain are, who is Thomas Ling, and why does he own so many empty or just plain strange websites? And the answer to these lies in the quilting page we found earlier. Near the top of this page, there's a logo reading DFI. We can find this same logo in the FAQ section of another website registered under Thomas's name called dentalfillins.com. This was a job board of sorts for dentists that was likely operated by Thomas back in the day. We know this because one of his currently operational websites is thomaslingdds.com, which is a website for a San Francisco dentist named Thomas W. Ling. This quilting page also includes pictures of quilts created for Jeff and Josh for their first birthday. These names also align with 2 more domains Thomas registered in 2010 and 2014. Lastly, while looking through the many domains connected to Thomas, I discovered a subdomain of Cthulhu.net containing a 7-day travel journal. These entries describe Thomas and his wife Karen's adventures across Asia, including Thailand, China, and Hong Kong. And as expected, Thomas also owns the KarenLing.com domain as well. To summarize, Mortis.com was most probably a personal media server owned and operated by a San Francisco dentist named Thomas Ling. As for the many domains under his name, he acquired them for his businesses, close family members, or for random projects like creating an online travel journal. These were also meant to be a completely personal thing. Unfortunately, someone accidentally stumbled across one of his sites and turned them into a decade-long internet rabbit hole that many are still trying to figure out to this day. Slave Master. In the year 2000, a very disturbing chain message started spreading on AOL, which was a popular instant messenger at the time. If a guy by the name of Slave Master contacts you, do not answer. He has killed 56 women that he has talked to on the internet. Please send out to all the women on your buddy list. Also ask them to pass this on. He has been on Yahoo, AOL, Excite so far. This is no joke. And please send this to men too, just in case. Send to everyone you know. Now, chain messages like this were fairly common back in the day. They were an evolution of the physical chain letters and often contained some pretty out there claims, like telling the reader to forward it to 20 people or something bad would happen in 3 days. This one, however, felt a lot more real, and that's because it actually was. Slave Master wasn't the name of a fictional horror character someone had created to start an internet hoax. Instead, it was the username of John Edward Robinson, the internet's first serial killer. Someone who used early online chat rooms like AOL to find and entrap his targets. One of his first online victims was 45-year-old Sheila Faith. She met John in 1994 in an online chat room, and after talking with her for a few weeks to gain her trust, John promised to pay for the surgery of her 15-year-old wheelchair-bound daughter, Debbie. All Sheila had to do was go to Kansas City where John lived, and he promised to take care of everything else. She agreed and moved to the city with Debbie in December of that year. Unfortunately, that was the last time anyone saw Sheila or Debbie alive. A few years later, John used the persona of Slave Master once again, this time with a 21-year-old Polish immigrant named Izabela Lewicka. Izabela met John in 1997 and began chatting with him almost daily. Over the next 2 years, John showered her with love and convinced her to move to Kansas City as well. Once she was there, he rented an apartment for her and even made her sign a marriage certificate, which he never turned in. But then Izabela suddenly disappeared, and when asked about her by her peers, John claimed that she was caught using drugs and was thus deported back to Poland. Tragically, this lie worked better than he might have expected, giving him the confidence to look for his third online victim just a few months later. And the next person to fall in this trap was 27-year-old Suzette Troughton. She was a nurse from Michigan with big dreams. John realized this early on in their conversation and posed as a wealthy businessman to entice Suzette. He offered her a $60,000 a year job working as his non-existent father's primary caretaker. And to sweeten the deal further, also promised to take her with him on his business trips around the world. This was what finally convinced Suzette to leave her already established life in Michigan and move to Kansas City. But unlike his previous 3 victims who disappeared without a trace, Suzette gave John's name and number to her mother before leaving. Shortly after leaving for Kansas City, her mother also started receiving several typed letters, supposedly from Suzette, reassuring her of her safety. However, her mother found these letters incredibly suspicious, as Suzette had never sent a typed letter before. They were also free of any grammatical or spelling mistakes, which didn't match Suzette's writing style. So she called John, hoping to speak with her daughter. Instead, she was met with hostility from John, who accused Suzette of stealing his money and running away. But Suzette's mother knew her daughter would never do something like this. So she called the police on March 1st, 2000, kickstarting an investigation into John's life. The police in Kansas City, however, were already quite suspicious of him. You see, John was a lifelong con artist who'd been behind bars several times for embezzlement, fraud, forgery, and other similar charges. Most importantly, his name had already come up in multiple missing woman cases. Each time he escaped consequences due to insufficient evidence. This time, investigators held back and quietly kept John under surveillance. And it wasn't long before their patience paid off. One of his would-be victims called the police on him. This gave the authorities a warrant to put John under arrest and search his property for evidence. However, what this search uncovered was far more horrific than anyone could have imagined. As it turned out, Sheila Faith was far from his first victim. She was just the first one he lured through the internet. He'd already lured and killed 4 more women before Sheila, dating as far back as 1984, including 19-year-old Paula Godfrey, 27-year-old Catherine Clampett, and 49-year-old Beverly Bonner. However, his worst crime was against 19-year-old Lisa Stasi. John approached Lisa and her 4-month-old daughter after his brother expressed his desire to adopt a child. He lured Lisa with promises of a stable life, only to end her life in a hotel room. He then gave Lisa's 4-month-old daughter to his brother, claiming that she was an orphan, and even pocketed $5,500 from them in legal fees. After his arrest, authorities searched his property with cadaver dogs and discovered multiple oil drums filled with the rotting remains of his victims. He was convicted in January 2003 and received 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, along with a death sentence for his crimes. Markovian parallax denigrate. On March 11, 2004, American journalist and U.S. Congress worker Suzanne Lindauer was arrested by the FBI on suspicion of being a spy for Iraq. While doing some research on her, a Wikipedia user named Lazarus666 found a connection between her and a string of strange Usenet posts from 8 years earlier. For some context, Usenet was the precursor to modern internet forums. Discussions on Usenet were divided into several sections called the news groups, similar to subreddits on Reddit. Now, spam on Usenet wasn't exactly rare. Shady companies often made promotional posts in an attempt to market their products for cheap. However, on August 5, 1996, several groups were flooded with tens of thousands of posts that looked like regular spam at first, but a closer look revealed their true intention, or lack thereof. Put simply, these posts were mostly complete gibberish with seemingly random strings of words formed into paragraphs. Now, when Lazarus was researching Susan Lindauer, he came across one of the few surviving posts from that day and noticed that it was made by a Susan Lindauer as well. Lazarus speculated that these might have something to do with Susan sending encoded messages back to Iraq. Looking back, however, this theory makes little to no sense. That's mainly because in over 2 decades, no one has been able to identify any patterns in the posts that might suggest they're encoded. More importantly, if Susan wanted to broadcast anonymous messages, why would she use an email with her own name on it? But regardless of how feasible Lazarus's theory was, it ended up generating a ton of interest in the topic. These strange Usenet posts were later given the name Markovian parallax denigrate based on the subject line of the sole surviving post. It also became known as one of the first great mysteries of the internet, with people from around the world trying to figure out what these posts meant. Unfortunately, no one has been able to find a concrete answer ever since. The theory linking them with Susan Lindauer was eventually dropped by internet sleuths as they couldn't find anything connecting the two. It was also discovered that the email address actually belonged to a student of the same name from the University of Wisconsin. However, this also went nowhere as the email address turned out to be spoofed from the start. People then looked into the mystery's title, Markovian parallax denigrate, and assumed that it might have something to do with the Markovian process, which is the math used by phone keyboards to predict the next word in a sentence, and even serves as the foundation for modern text-based AI services like ChatGPT. So maybe someone was just experimenting with a new Markovian process-based bot and decided to unleash it on the Usenet. Unfortunately, this theory doesn't have much ground to stand on either. The thing is, this mystery only got the Markovian name because that was the subject of the most popular surviving post. This led many to falsely believe that this was the subject for all the thousands of similar posts made that day. But that can't be further from the truth. The word Markovian appeared on the subjects of only 2 posts out of thousands. Even if we assume these posts were generated by a Markovian bot, the theory still doesn't hold up, since the content of these posts was pure gibberish. Despite the fact that Markovian text generators from years before this incident were already capable of producing coherent sentences with relative ease. So, what's the actual explanation here? What was the true meaning behind these thousands of seemingly nonsensical posts? Well, like many other mysteries on the internet, the most likely answer is also the simplest one. Put plainly, this spam of thousands of posts was just that, spam. Something that becomes abundantly clear when you consider that, with a single exception, the only news groups targeted were related to Christianity. In other words, there's a strong chance this was simply an attempt by an unknown user to troll Christian news groups. As for why the spam looked so jumbled, it was likely an attempt to bypass Usenet's spam filters, which typically flagged and deleted repeated messages. That said, this is still just an educated guess, and the rabbit hole can get much deeper the more you look into this. Maybe it did originate as something far more exotic, like a text version of spy number stations, or an attempt to test the security of Usenet by a foreign entity. But unless the original developer comes forward with a confession, the spam theory is the best we have to explain the rabbit hole that is Markovian parallax denigrate.